I want to talk about today how to not lose hope, how to deal with eco-anxiety, and how to navigate a climate crisis. And I think the best way for me to do that is by sharing a little bit about my own journey through sustainable living. Now, my introduction into sustainability was the zero waste movement. Does anyone know the zero waste movement? Just a quick show of hands, I would love to see that. Oh, great, okay, cool. Just now I know what I'm working with. So the prime objective of zero waste is to avoid waste, as well as being mindful with all kinds of resources. And then there is a specific focus on plastic waste in particular. And you could say that the 5 principles of zero waste are refuse, reuse, reduce, recycle, and rot. And these principles inspire many environmentalists, including myself. Now, I wasn't raised with a lot of radical green ideas that made it super easy for me to go green as an adult. I was told when I was younger that you shouldn't throw litter in nature, that's uncool, that you shouldn't leave the water running endlessly, and that you, whatever you did, should not leave the room without turning off the lights. What I like to refer to as mainstream 90s sustainability experiences. Not necessarily that they're exclusive to the 90s, but that's when I became acquainted with them for the first time. And I actually thought I was supposed to pursue a career in fashion. During my gap year, I got a foot in the door with some fashion magazines as a street style photographer and a writer. And I also started my own style blog that got me invited to some really lavish events. Basically, the complete opposite of sustainability, really. And although I didn't quite have the language to articulate what I was feeling, something was off. Something wasn't quite right. I felt like I was doing something that was a little bit out of alignment with my values. Although I, as 18, had a pretty hard time figuring out exactly what my values were. Then I came across an article about a woman who was living zero waste. She was carrying around 3 years' worth of trash in a tiny glass jar. And the image of this jar stuck with me. I quickly started taking an interest in reducing my own trash. I started seeing plastic everywhere. In nature, in my house, in the city, I started seeing plastic everywhere. And this interest sparked a 30-day zero waste experiment. For 1 month, I documented online how I was trying to reduce my waste. I was trying to be zero waste as well. And I would share the recipes that I found and the zero waste swaps that I used, and overall just my experience trying this out. And when this month was up, I was left with 2 lessons learned. Firstly, I learned that I really liked this. I felt like this was in alignment with my values, getting sort of closer to what those were. And I felt like I was participating in something that was just a little bit bigger than myself. The second lesson I learned is that it takes a lot longer than 30 days to become zero waste. Let me tell you now. So after these initial 30 days were over, I never looked back. I made zero waste and sustainable living my livelihood. And I know that zero waste doesn't cover every aspect of sustainability, so far from really. But for me, it was a stepping stone that I used to learn more. It was my introduction into thinking critically about consumerism. And this was important to me because prior to this experiment, I had never thought about my own impact. I had never thought about what happens to my trash once I bin it. And sadly, I had never had the notion that my actions as a consumer mattered to anyone. So this was a really powerful change. Now, I have spent 7 years in this lifestyle. The experiment is ongoing. I have matured in this lifestyle, evolved in it. I have spent the better part of my 20s in this lifestyle. And what was once a motivational stepping stone has become a foundation that I so often enjoy taking apart and putting back together again in new ways with new perspectives and ideas. See, I have learned a lot of things that I wish someone had told me when I first started out. For instance, the trash jar. While inspirational because it's so different, it's intriguing and it's challenging, it's not necessarily a realistic goal. Today, I like to refer to the trash jar as the skinny supermodel of zero waste. And what I mean by that is that just like in the fashion industry, there is a certain commodification of a certain body type. There is a certain beauty standard that everybody should aspire to be like. And granted, the fashion industry is changing a little bit, but we can all agree it's not a lot and it's not happening very fast. So in zero waste, we have the trash jar that does a little bit the same thing. It demands and requires that we all fit into the same box. It assumes that we all have similar availability of sustainable products and options available to us in order to fulfill this ideal. And I've learned that everybody's sustainability journey is in fact different. Not everybody wants to or can fit 3 years' worth of trash into a tiny glass jar. And I think that's important. So as I made zero waste my livelihood, I started having people ask me when I had earned the right to call myself a zero waster. When I earned that zero, when did I achieve the goal, cross the finish line, and became zero waste? And to this day, I love replying. Any day now. See, there is no such thing as 100% perfectly zero waste in a society not designed for it. And moreover, we cannot actually determine the impact of our lives based solely on the content of our bins alone. There's a lot more than what the physical trash can tell us. Now, I want to share a specific incident that made me think differently about my place in sustainability, that made me reevaluate my performance in zero waste. So, I was at a restaurant and I was working my trash jar. It was early in my zero waste journey, is such a cheesy word, but it was early in my zero waste journey. And I was carrying this jar around everywhere with me, and when I was accumulating accidental trash that couldn't be recycled, I would put it into this jar. I don't know why the jar is over here. I would put it into this jar, and then I would carry that around with me. Then I didn't throw anything away, so zero waste, because I kept it. And I was at a restaurant, and I was ordering a beverage. And I did this thing where, before specifying my drink order, I would make sure that they understood, the staff, that I did not require a plastic straw. This was also before we started talking about paper straws, so specifically this was about a plastic straw. And I would say many times before getting to the actual drink order, I don't require disposables, plastic straws. As you can probably tell, I spent a lot of energy on this. This took up a great deal of my time. It was important to me that I didn't get the straw because there wasn't any room in my jar. So lo and behold, I got a straw anyway. And this sent me into an actual panic attack. I felt physically ill with guilt and shame and nausea because from my point of view, I had failed. And don't get me wrong, if you don't need a straw, don't get a straw, like consume consciously and all that obviously, but I had placed my scope of success so narrowly that I was doomed to feel like a failure sooner or later. In this case, sooner. And I was struggling with these massive emotions being provoked by the tiniest bits of plastic. And I realized that I would either have to find a new way of looking at sustainability, or I would perhaps be forced to give it up altogether out of sheer burnout. So what I did was that I started looking into the invisible impact. I started looking into the impact that we cannot see, that doesn't end up in my bin, the impact that isn't represented by physical trash, because there's plenty of that as well. And I got an overview. I became able to compare different impacts, different actions, different products in a more realistic way. Ratio, you know. And I became able to not sweat the small stuff. See, the plastic straw, for instance, remember how it became this grand symbol of everything that was wrong with the world for a couple of years there? how everybody and their parents were talking about plastic straws and ocean plastic, straws in our oceans, turtles, straw bans. We all came together to solve this global issue. Well, except of course for the fact that only a tiny fraction of ocean plastic is accounted for by straws. And additionally, the straw bans that were put into place many places actually caused a lot of issues for people with disabilities who depended on them. Now, I still refuse plastic straws because I still don't need them. I even still sometimes do the little trick where I specify I don't need anything and then specify my order, But I also don't tell myself that that's the most important thing I've done that day. I also know that that is not peak sustainability for me. And I tell myself that my efforts and actions as an environmentalist are not compromised should I be given a straw anyway. I realized that in zero waste and in many other consumer-based movements, the eco-anxiety is often derived from this idea of perfection, perhaps even fear of perfection. The idea that you're only good enough if you're able to cram your entire life into a tiny glass jar. And when that doesn't feel possible for you, you're the failure. You did it wrong. You can't call yourself zero waste because look how much you failed. I don't think there's anything sustainable about that. And another thing I came to realize was that when we focus so much on these tiny objects, the physical trash in our bins, we might end up thinking that that's where the majority of our impact comes from. And it isn't. So I decided that I wanted to change that for myself. See, in many movements that are consumer-based, and not only zero waste, but the consumer takes action. The consumer boycotts certain products. The consumer alters their existence to feel as sustainable and be as conscious as they possibly can. And something that I kept wondering about was, is that fair? See, I know for a fact that many consumers want to be sustainable. I know for a fact that many people would love to change their lives, but simply do not have eco options accessible to them. Actually, and I didn't even think I wanted to talk about this today, but I recently read an article that read, "Consumers love plastic packaging." And then it was about how much plastic packaging consumers generally use on a daily basis. And I was thinking to myself, consumers don't love plastic. We're taken hostage by plastic. Most of us don't have any other option. So how, in reality, dare you say that we love plastic when I know for a fact that so many of us would rather be without it if we have the option to? So another question that came up for me was, if we want to do that, but we don't think we can, or if we don't have accessibility of sustainable options, then where should sustainability come from? As far as I can tell, sustainability and the responsibility to act sustainably rests on 3 legs. First of all, we have the consumer. Woo! Power to the people. Then we have governments and politics. And then we have corporations and industries. See, consumers do have power. Zero waste taught me this. It's an important lesson. But we do not necessarily have the power to change everything by ourselves. Now, I wanted to change my lifestyle. I wanted to change my habits. I wanted to change my diet. And I think you guys should too. There are tremendous benefits in doing so. But the willingness of consumers to change shouldn't become a green alibi for the other 2 legs, governments and politics, corporations and industries, to just relax, lay back, and watch us do all the work, or perhaps throw us a greenwashed, half-assed bone once in a while. Especially not when there's so much evidence to consider how all the ways where these 2 other legs could have a massive positive impact if they prioritized it. I used to believe that consumers had the largest impact because there are more consumers than there are billion-dollar corporations. There are more consumers than there are government entities. But in fact, it's the complete other way around. And moreover, the majority of us are completely dependent upon the systems and structures that are built up around us. by industries and politics. 71% of all global emissions are caused by the same 100 companies or government-owned entities. And I will just let you take a wild guess as to what those companies are doing. It's fossil fuels. It's fossil fuels. An industry that's been advertising the importance of consumer action since the 60s, and that today continue to push a narrative that makes stainless steel straws and cotton totes seem like more meaningful changes than that of green energy, than that of placing restrictions on fossil fuels. And really, that is what we should be doing, not shaming our neighbor for not bringing a reusable coffee cup to work. Imagine if we met billion-dollar corporations with the same energy as when someone throws litter in nature, if someone leaves the tap running, or if someone does not turn off the lights when they leave a room. That's sadly not exactly where we are yet, but hopefully we will get there. And look, I understand if you're tired of being told about the multiple ways in which you're ruining the planet. Yes, you, the ways in which you're ruining the planet. I get it if you have had it up to here with eco-swaps. And I understand if you feel discouraged from making green actions because every green choice contradicts another. You shouldn't use plastic bags, no, but you also really shouldn't be using cotton totes because cotton actually has a higher production impact than that of plastic. So also no to cotton totes, except you could use them consciously. When exactly is that? I still find power and happiness in having changed my life, in living as sustainably and as low impact as possible. But while I'm doing that, I also want us to uphold a higher standard around us for governments, politics, industries, and corporations. I gave this talk the title, How to Not Lose Hope, because one of the main reactions I receive when I share my journey through sustainability, through zero waste, through low impact and other buzzwords, is that it feels discouraging to be told all of a sudden that consumer action matters so little. Now, you were just told by Zero Waste, and actually you were just told by me, that consumer action matters a lot. So why take that good feeling away? It's really uncool. I thought I was just saving the planet, refusing my straw. What are you doing? Consumer action does matter. It's just not the only thing that matters. Consumers do have responsibility for sure, but we shouldn't be carrying all of the responsibility around all the time. So in order to not lose hope, I hope we can find a balance within ourselves to go out and be as curious and respectful, as kind and sustainable and critical as we possibly can be, whilst also redirecting all our anger, all our anxiety, our frustration, and rightfully so, our fury, in the direction of the systems responsible. That way, you don't have to save the world. You just have to improve a you-sized part of it. Thank you.